Here we go.
Hello and welcome back to the Rossi Brothers Sports Podcast. My name is John, joined as always by my brother Adam. How's it going?
It's going great. It's going
Ooh.
great. Just enjoying life and really excited to be joined by another guy who's hopefully enjoying life here. We are honored to be joined by Mr. John Haluck today on the Rossi Brothers Sports Podcast. John has spent the vast majority of his life on the left coast in the grand state of California, where he attended Loyola Marymount University. There he was a member of the men's crew team. He was part of the record-setting 1971 men's crew team, which was inducted into the Loyola Marymount LMU Athletic Hall of Fame earlier this year. John then was an officer in the Air Force during the Vietnam conflict, and he continued to serve as an officer in the Air Force many years thereafter. He went on to law school at the University of the Pacific. After graduating from law school in 1979, he enjoyed an over 40-year career as an attorney. A proud husband, father, and grandfather, he enjoys golfing, spending time with his family, and doing community service with his church during retirement. Welcome, John, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
It's gonna be
absolutely. We're excited. This is also a Rossi Brothers Sports Podcast first. We're checking them off the list, all the different firsts. But you are officially the first rower that we ever had on the podcast, believe it or not. So I don't know, just to start off with, how did you get into this? How did you first learn about crew, and then how did you end up, rowing it?
Well, it was somewhat of an interesting story. I was actually in the ROTC program at LM. It was Loyola University of Los Angeles. At that time, it was before Marymount had moved there, before the name change. Anyway, I was at a drill one day, and I was 6'6" tall. And one of the officers of the cadet corps was about 5'3", and I was at attention. He came up in front of me and looked up with his head pointed up in the air. And after inspecting me, he then said, "You're going to come out for crew, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, what is crew?" And he said, "See me after the cadet group meeting here," which I did. And I went out and, whoops. Anyway, he told me a little bit about crew, and I went out, and that was a real tremendous experience, meeting the guys who were out there for crew. And so I gave it a try, and it worked out so well that I rode in the freshman boat. I was one of the 8 heavyweight crew in the freshman boat, and we did so well that I decided to go out the next year. And to make a long story short, a little bit shorter, I'm sure we'll cover a lot of it. I made that really superior boat in 1970-71 as a sophomore, and there were only 2 sophomores in that boat. And as it turns out, we set some pretty good records. And as I was telling you before the podcast started, we are the only crew team that's been inducted into the Hall of Fame at Loyola Marymount University. Took us 50 years, but we got there.
Like Bill Mazeroski, better late than never.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
quite a distinction.
But for those who don't know what crew is essentially Olympic rowing. If they've watched the rowing competition on television from the Olympics, it's the very long oars and very long, narrow boats. Back when we rowed 50 years ago, just as in the book I told you about, Boys in the Boat, those boats were mainly created by a guy named George Pocock up in Washington, and they were made out of wood, and they were very thin-skinned boats, maybe 18 to 24 inches wide and about 30, 40 feet long, that carried 9 guys, 8 of us rowing, and one guy called the coxswain in the bow in the stern of the boat, calling cadence or telling us what we needed to do, pull a little harder, pull a little faster. the stroke set the pace. So it was it's a pretty great sport. I'm very happy to have been part of it.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's pretty fun
amazing
to
that
watch,
you.
I'll say.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was like, I haven't actually. If I've watched it, I don't have a very distinct memory of like this is it. But I will say, just reading the book Boys in the Boat, excuse me, which I did read in preparation for this via your recommendation, John. Thanks very much. I could see how that would be super exciting, and the
Yeah, and if
author
you
talks about these big crowds there, and I could imagine how exciting that would be to see the boats coming
and
along.
if you just think about it, you've got 8 oarsmen, 4 on each side. The oars themselves are about 12 to 14 feet long, if not longer. Trying to remember. Yeah, they're about 12 to 14 feet long, I think. And you've got 4 on each side. And the only way that the boat can move well is if everybody is putting their oars in the water at the exact same time, pulling the exact same distance, or uh, the exact same distance with the oar in the water, and then pulling the oar out of the water exactly at the same time, because any drag at all will slow the boat down. And so that the story in the book, the Boys in the Boat, made the point that what made them different from any other 8 guys at the University of Washington and ultimately in the world was the fact that they were able to row so well together and get in the same swing, the same cadence, the exact motion, and that barely ever happens. And that's why I think our boat in the 1970-71 year was so successful is we got that 1 in a million swing together, that we were able to work so well together, and nobody could have predicted which 8 oarsmen would have done that. But it was being in the right place at the right time, and we were able to accomplish that. And that's why it's that the Boys in the Boat book is so great, because that's the entire story, is that these 8 guys in the 1930s, who came from all different backgrounds in a troubled world, and sat in a boat and beat the Germans for the gold medal in the Olympics. And we, as a small school, Loyola Marymount University, only had 4,000 students at the time in that year, and we were beating schools like UCLA. We beat UCLA not only in the West Coast championships, but also in the national championships in Syracuse, New York, at the IRA. And they had 40,000 students and a budget that exceeded ours probably 10-fold or more. And so for us, our small program to have accomplished that task was a sign that we were a special crew.
In the foreword to that book you just mentioned, Daniel James Brown talks about or writes about talking to Joe Rance before he passed, and this like very just this magical, he could just tell that Joe Rance had this almost reverence for that feeling of being in this boat. He talks about the boat, and just that this kind of beyond words power that exists in that boat. And it's kind of cool to have read that, and now to hear you talk about that boat that you were on in 1971, because I can hear the same thing when you're talking. It must have been a once in a lifetime thing, and
it truly was, because the next year I went out for crew again, and the seniors had graduated, so they weren't in. The guys from that 70-71 boat that were seniors weren't there, and trying to find somebody to replace those guys just didn't happen. And it happens so seldomly that it's that one special crew that everybody in that crew was happy to be part of after the fact. And we didn't know it at the time, but we do know it now, that we were a special group of guys.
Well, really makes you appreciate when it does happen.
Yeah,
exactly. Is there something?
Let me tell you a little bit more about how the boat moves through the water. As I told you, it's about 18 to 24 inches wide at the widest part, comes to a point at both ends, and it glides through the water. And so part of getting the boat to move well is to keep it moving even when your oar is not in the water. And that was part of the special swing that I told you about. Is you're pulling as hard as you can when the oar's in the water, but then you've got to move forward again to take another stroke. And you're sitting on a rolling seat. The seat itself moves about 3 feet. And so as the crew is moving forward, if you move together up on your seats all together, the boat's not going to sink into the water at all. So that's the other part of the swing. But I'll let you ask some more questions. I could probably teach a class or try to teach a class on rowing, but that's not what this podcast is about.
I don't know. I find it really interesting.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot.
I was gonna say my grasp on physics is like sometimes questionable, but
Mine
it's
is
like
always questionable.
I can picture what you're talking about. It is really cool, especially right again, like
And
kind
if
of
you think the
watching
race
that.
course, think of the race course is 2,000 meters long, which is just over 1.25 miles. And we're moving this boat that weighs several hundred pounds with 8 guys who weigh almost 160 to 180 pounds each. And we're moving that down that course in about 6 minutes. Some crews are a little longer than 6 minutes and some are lower. We set a record that year of about almost 5.5 minutes moving that boat 1.25 miles, 2,000 meters. So it's quite a feat to move that thing smoothly and fast.
That's about as fast as my fastest mile run on the track. So, um,
Yeah,
no,
same here.
no, it's faster. Yeah, because if it's more. Yeah, no, it's definitely faster. Um, anyway, yeah, no, I was gonna ask also just with the idea of the swing and kind of knowing your crew, um, and at least my impression from having had a couple of friends who did crew a year or two in college. Um, they're often like early mornings out on the river. I assume the river at Loyola Marymount.
Well,
Or
we actually rode in a marina
okay,
called Marina Del Rey, and then there was a creek that we had to go around a breakwater to get to called Bologna Creek, and we shared both the marina and Bologna Creek with UCLA. So
gotcha.
even
Okay,
during our practices, we were able to compete with UCLA in short sprints and that sort of thing, just to see who could do better.
cool.
But for the most
Yeah,
part, yes, we started. The race season was very short. It was only 6 to 8 weeks long, and that
well,
was usually in April and May. But we started workouts in August, and so we would essentially run for a couple miles. We would lift weights. We would row crew, and the rowing part usually was in the afternoon during the workup part of the season through some pretty cold weather, and as cold as it gets in California anyway. But in the evenings, as it's getting dark, it can get pretty cold and windy, um, but we rode probably 15, 20 miles or more in some choppy water, trying to dodge the sailboats and the pleasure boats that were used in the marina, and 20 miles of rowing, and then we'd put the boats away and we'd go home and do our homework and studies for college classes, and we start the same thing all over again the next day. And we did that for until the spring break, and then in spring break we had what's called double sessions, and we would get up very early in the morning as the sun was coming up, and we'd go and row 40 miles in the morning.
Wow.
And you're holding on to wooden oars with your bare hands, and you're developing blisters, and the blisters are peeling and they're bleeding. And we're rowing 40 miles in the morning. We're rowing 40 miles in the afternoon. And
How
then
long
we're
would it take you to
also,
row those 40 miles?
I'm sorry.
How long would it take you to go 40 miles?
Well, it would depend on if we were doing sprints or if we were doing long distance. But it would take an hour and a half to 2 hours, good training session to
Wow.
do that 40 miles. But the thing was that you were concentrating. You weren't caring much about the distance. You were more concerned and more concentrating on hitting the water with your oar the exact same time as the rest of the guys in the boat, and just staying with the pace. And that's what you work on, and that's what distance training in crew is just trying to work on that timing, and over and over and over again, repetitive timing. It wasn't so much for strength and it wasn't so much for speed. It was simply to work on the timing and the swing. The double sessions was to get you ready physically, mentally, for the racing season, because as we'll get to when we get to the races, how important getting yourself athletically ready, because you're going to be burning your oxygen in your blood very, very quickly when you're at 34 strokes a minute for the first minute and a half, because that's where you're trying to win the race, is in that first quarter mile or 500 meters. You get a lead in the first 500 meters, and hopefully you can bring the stroke down and press on and stay ahead. But as the book said, quite often that American team came back from being behind and ended up winning. And that happens too. And that's being physically ready, because after you've gone more than 1,500 meters, to bring the stroke up at a faster pace, you're out of breath. And I think the book even described that, how the oarsmen just collapsed in the boat at the end of the race, because you've given everything. You're using every muscle in your body. You're using every ounce of oxygen in your blood, and you are just pressing everything. But you're trying to stay exactly the same as everybody else in the boat.
For the do you think there's something to, like, sharing sort of the dedication of having to do all of that and other things maybe outside of the boat also? I don't know if a crew would spend a lot of time together outside of the boat as well, if that is something that you think plays into being able to, like you said, that crew you were on was really able to find that swing.
I think if
Do
you
you think
ask,
that's
I think
part
if
of
you
the
ask the guys, not only the guys in the boat that were inducted into the Hall of Fame, but if you ask any oarsman who's road crew more than a year, I think every one of them would say, yes, I learned a great deal on how to deal with difficulties in my life. My personal feeling is that it helped me. I've been diagnosed with leukemia, with blood cancer, for 20 years. And I've been through chemotherapy, very toxic chemotherapy, 3 different times for 6 months at a time. And I believe crew helped me get through that, because crew taught me that if you try hard enough, you concentrate hard enough, you can overcome just about anything. And that, I think that helped me make it through. And I think if you ask most of the guys in that crew, I think they would say the same thing. They've had some difficulties in their lives, and the strength that crew gave them helped them deal with those things in life.
You mentioned the guys in the boat. Do you keep up with any of those people to this day?
I do, actually. As a matter of fact, one of our freshman coxswain, he wasn't in this boat, but he went on to become a chief pilot for a major airline, and he was also Air Force ROTC at the same time I was. So I've kept in touch with him, and he actually runs not a blog, but he has a group that gets together on Zoom every 2 weeks, not only of our crew, but all crews that want to talk with other crew members. And I just saw the other day that the stroke from our boat signed on to that call. I wasn't on the call that day, but so yeah, many of us stick together. Many of us communicate. have kept in touch with each other for the past 50 years. I don't do it as regularly, and we've even gotten together physically once or twice in the past 50 years, but we keep in touch somehow. Yeah, so
Cool.
we all have this common bond of crew. I think that everybody's been through it. It's tough for everybody, and so we have that common bond.
The Daniel James Brown kind of goes through each position in the boat and talks about the I forget the terms. Talks about kind of the engine in the middle and the guys that
Yeah.
can be really precise and the guys who are your power. But what position were you in the boat, and how did that correspond
I
to your
was
strengths?
I was right in the middle, starboard. Um, we had a unique configuration. So usually the in the stern of the boat is the coxswain is sitting there and he's holding on to some steering mechanism. Today's boats are so modern and high tech that I don't know what the coxswain does as far as steering it. But in our day, we rode a George Pocock wooden boat, and he would literally hold on to wooden handles that were connected to ropes that would actually move the tiller in the stern of the boat. And he would also bang those wooden handles against the side of the boat in cadence with the stroke. And then directly in front of him was the stroke, and that's the guy that sets the cadence, and he's got to be regularly at the proper stroke and doing everything the same stroke after stroke after stroke. And he was usually on the port side, which would have been the right side of the boat as you're looking. If you think about it, the oarsmen have their backs to the bow, which is the front of the boat. So we don't really get to see where we're headed or what's in front of us. The coxswain's keeping an eye on what's in front of the boat. So port would be to the right and starboard would be to the left. So the stroke is on the port side on the right, and right in front of the coxswain, and then the 7-man is essentially the stroke on the other side. All of us on the left, on the starboard side, are going to be looking usually at the 7-man to see where he is in the stroke. If we keep up with him and he's doing everything exactly like the stroke, then we're all going to be in proper cadence. So 8 is port, 7 is starboard, 6 is port, 5 and 4 in our boat were starboard, and then 3, 2, and 1 port, starboard, port.
So in the middle there you have.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in my mind, I'm picturing like every other one, but it wasn't like that in your boat. You had those 2 in the middle that were both on the
and
same
that was
side.
that was our coach's decision to put 2 starboard on one side, and that may have been for direction purposes. If one side is stronger than the other, then the boat's going to turn naturally with the strength of the stronger side, and you want to try and avoid that because you don't want that coxswain to have to pull on the tiller, because if he pulls on the tiller, the piece of wood that's at the back of the boat is going to be dragging, and so you want to try and get the guys pulling equally on both sides so that very narrow boat just slides through the water like ice. Okay. So I rode starboard in the center of the boat as a sophomore behind a very strong junior, I believe. And we got along pretty well. The whole crew got along pretty well. We spent a lot of time together when we weren't at the shell house, but a good portion of our time was spent at that shell house. And I was a bit unique because I was I lived near the university. I didn't stay on campus, so I was a commuter student. So I didn't spend as much time with the crew as a lot of the other guys did, but I spent as much time as I could with them. So I hope that explains properly how the positions on the crew works.
For sure.
Yeah,
Your
it's-
muscles.
We were all pretty lightweight at the time. It's amazing. We all lost maybe 20 pounds between the first practice and by the time we were in race season. But we were lean and mean, and that made us pretty successful. And that's also a good point. The less weight you carry around in the boat, the better. And that's why our coxswain were usually tried to lose as much weight as they could. We didn't want a coxswain that was more than 100 to 120 pounds in sitting, not pulling his weight. And so that you get as light a guy as you could as a coxswain, and then the crew, as light and strong as you could be, was to the benefit of the crew as well.
Strength to weight ratio.
Yeah,
That's important if you're trying to climb up things also. I guess anytime you're fighting gravity. I also wanted to ask, was there any like one particular race or maybe some other just like really standout memory you have from that season that really sticks out in your mind?
There was one race that we did exceptionally well, and we did the 2,000 meters in 5.5 minutes. And it was against Orange Coast College, but they were JV and under only, and also against UC Irvine, University of California at Irvine. And we knew, and that was only about our third week of racing, but we knew based on that outcome and how badly we beat the other team distance-wise between the boats and the time, that we had something special going and that we were going to be pretty successful. But there's also stories of at the West Coast Sprints, we rode in the finals in the championship race against Washington, British Columbia, Canada at that time had a crew, and UCLA, and there were two other major schools in it. And we started out, and after 500 meters, we were in the lead. Loyola was in the lead. I'll never forget it. And the coxswain was yelling that he was just going crazy about how well we were doing. And then all of a sudden, about 1,000 meters, it was a cry from him that way enough, hold off. And we literally stopped rowing, but we kept gliding. And the reason is that a sailboat had come across the race course and had left a wake. And if we rode into the wake, we were likely going to really get messed up. So he stopped us. And once he was also afraid we were going to hit the sailboat. So he stopped us, and the sailboat got through, and we picked it up. But by the time we picked it up, we were behind most everybody. But we picked it up again, and we took off. And eventually we came in third in that West Coast Sprints. To Washington was first, British Columbia, Canada was second, and we were third. UCLA was fourth. So even though we had dropped back because of the sailboat coming across the lane we were in, we showed that we could, in fact, bring it back together again and do well. And that's why we decided to go to the IRA at the end of the regular racing season to try again. And that was tough because it was on a much bigger lake and windier conditions, but we ended up coming in 10th in the nation, just ahead of UCLA that came in 11th.
Nice. Wow. That was one of the things I was wondering too, is talking about like the time, how drastically does that vary depending on the conditions?
Well, it can have a big effect. If it's a crosswind and there's waves, and the oars are banging against the waves, you're not going to have a very good time at all. But in a race, it only matters if you're the fastest of the slow boats.
Yeah, it's just position and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if the best water for a crew race is glassy, flat water, but that hardly ever happens. But when it does, you take advantage of it, and your time can be the the 5.5 to 6 minutes that I was telling you about. But in bad weather, it can be as long as 7 minutes, 7.5 minutes. So times really don't say much except when they're in comparison to other crews in the same race.
Yeah, at the same time.
That's what the difference is.
Gotcha. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I'm always curious with sports that are timed, how, because I think there are some where, right, like, in my mind, 5K race or something like that, often, you can compare your time, like, oh, I have a personal best, and that like means something, because unless it's like really extreme wind or like hills, usually your times are pretty comparable. But there are definitely other sports where you still get timed and stuff, but the conditions vary so much more that it's not worthwhile to compare one day's time to another.
Yeah, if you look at the times, there are world record times in crew 2,000 meters that are kept by major organizations like the Olympic committees, because what they try to do is have regular regular water, right? They're measured distances and they're in controlled lakes. So hardly ever do you have blowing wind or anything like that. So they're able to have those regular times. But when we're talking at the collegiate level, we're rowing on lakes, we're rowing in marinas, we're rowing in San Diego's Mission Bay. And so you'll have a lot of different conditions where they don't really keep records or times that are comparable to other crews on other days. But in the Olympics and competitions like that, you certainly can do that. It's a little bit different than swimming records and that sort of thing. But it's a lot dependent on conditions.
Yeah, gotcha.
And you guys have that home course record for Loyola Marymount. Am I correct in understanding that?
It wasn't a home course. We were actually rowing in Newport, in Southern California, about an hour south of where Loyola Marymount was. Loyola Marymount actually didn't have its own race course. We practiced in Marina del Rey, and we would row in Bologna Creek, but there was only room for 2 crews in Bologna Creek. And most crew races are 6 crews racing side by side. So you need a river or a lake that's wide enough to have 6 crews with enough space between their oars so they don't bang into each other. And if you've ever seen a crew race in the Olympics, you'll see lines between the lanes. And if anybody's oar ever crossed those lines, they were disqualified. So that's why it's, anyway, that Loyola Marymount didn't have its own race course.
I guess what I read in your team's Hall of Fame blurb on the Loyola Marymount website is that is still the course record for that course. I guess not your home course.
Yes.
Today, so that was set in 1971, and it still stood these.
I wouldn't doubt it. 5.5 minutes, nearly. I think it was 5:37. A time that fast is pretty difficult to break. We had pretty regular conditions there. I don't recall that race being affected by a tailwind, and certainly if we had a tailwind, so did the other crew that we beat so badly. So I think it was just a good solid race, and it was the water was pretty calm, and so we were able to row a good race.
That's I don't know. That's super cool just to have something that stays lasting for that long.
50 plus years.
Yeah. But to maybe shift gears a little bit, and dig in, I guess, a little bit into some things about the boys in the boat. Sort of just to start off, maybe talking about that. In the book, right, talking about in the 30s, and so there's sort of a parallel between politics in the world at that time, the rise of Hitler in Germany, and this American crew team, training for the Olympics. when you were on crew, when you were in college at the time, we were involved in the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so like for your experience sort of in school beyond just rowing, going to school during that era, how did that impact you? What I don't know, what was it sort of just like during that time period?
To give the listeners some idea, there are comparisons, not parallels necessarily, but comparisons.
Yeah,
In the
sorry.
boys in the boys in the boat book, a lot of them came from families that had gone through the Depression and were financially destitute. There were some members who rowed crew who came from well-to-do families, but the story has to do with how all of these guys came together from different backgrounds um, to row a crew, row a boat in the Olympics held in Germany before World War II actually began, before Hitler. And Hitler was in charge of Germany at the time because the book talks about how he attended the final race and how the Nazis were controlling just about everything in Germany at the time. But the world was in a serious upheaval at the time, excuse me. Then to talk about our group, we all came from different backgrounds. As I told you, I lived off campus. Most of the guys lived on campus, but I think there was at least one other commuter. But we all came from different backgrounds. All of us were going to private university, so most everybody was able to either afford college or they did like me. I took a scholarship from the United States Air Force to attend Loyola Marymount. But there were protests, violent protests occurring around the country on college campuses. And Loyola was no exception. There wasn't any violence that I recall at Loyola, but there was protests occurring. And one day, the protesters decided they were going to try and take the flag down off the flagpole in the middle of Loyola Marymount, and the ROTC detachment got together to protect the flag. I wasn't there because I was at crew practice that day, but my brother was, and my father was an old Marine from World War II, and he had heard about it from some police officers in the hometown that I was living in at the time. And my father, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. It tore him up to know that there were protests occurring at his son's college. So there was a lot of upheaval in families as well, caused by the Vietnam conflict and the fact that it was not a popular conflict. It was also the time of the hippie generation. So there were a lot of drugs and rock and roll and free love going around, especially in places like San Francisco. So there was just an upheaval in the government, upheaval in the culture, and all of us got together to focus on crew, and I think that was partially an escape for us, for all of us who had a problem with either protesting the war or fighting the war. Some of us, like us ROTC cadets, supported our government, whereas the protesters obviously didn't support the government. But we came together nevertheless, for whatever reason, to row crew and devote ourselves to crew and focus on crew. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, no worries.
And that took us away from, I think, the bad parts of Vietnam. And like I said, we were all from different backgrounds, different parts of Southern California. Some were from different parts of the country. But we stayed together. Didn't participate in much of anything else on campus because, as I told you, we spent a lot of time on the water, a lot of time working out, running stairs at stadium stairs, and lifting weights and devoting ourselves to crew. So I think that's the comparisons between the two boats. Then once we were on the water, once we were in a race, we became a totally different group, so dedicated and committed to each other, like that crew that rowed in Germany and the boys in the boat. We were able to put it together on the water when we needed to. So,
kind of, I often lament to different people, just in conversation about like political and societal like polarization. And I often think like, man, if we could just come together as a world, now I'm thinking after hearing you talk, maybe the solution is just have everyone row crew, because it sounds like that was a great unifying thing during a time when, we had a lot of division in the
God
country
knows
and the
this
world.
country is divided right now, and it could sure use something that could get everybody to work together on something. And
Seriously though, you do highlight like sports as a unifier, and something that no matter your political backgrounds or whatever your beliefs or whatever you come from, like that's something you can all get behind. And I think that aspect of sports, that almost like tribalism, can be a bad thing, can be used in a very bad way, but it can also be channeled, I think, and used for good, and used as more of a unifying thing, like you talk of.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're right. Yeah.
I don't know. One way or the other, I feel like it certainly makes for things that are historically interesting, at the very least, looking at the past and at now too.
Yeah.
Sure. To say nothing else, is very engaging. Anyway,
I have to ask you one question about this book that I was like, wait, they do that? So it's the first race that Joe Rance and his crewmates, the story kind of follows him specifically in this book. The first race, it's a head-to-head match, so it's just Washington and Cal, and his freshman year, and the freshman crew beats Cal, and the author says, and in observance of this long-standing tradition in crew, the Washington guys go over to the Cal boat, and the Cal guys take off their sweaty jerseys from their backs and give them to the Washington guys. And the Washington guys have these jerseys, and I think Joe Rance might like give it to his girlfriend. So
yeah, that was
interesting.
That was a tradition in the 1970s when we rowed. Whether you were rowing against one other crew or against 6 crews or in a major competition, 18 crews. For instance, in the West Coast Sprints, when Washington ended up winning the finals, they got the shirts off the backs of every crew that rowed in that 3-day competition. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, it was quite awesome. I forget, I don't have those shirts anymore, but I remember having Stanford and USC and UC Irvine. A number of shirts. Never got to the point where we got Washington's. One of the other traditions, after the race is over, the winning crew throws their coxswain into the water. So the 8 oarsmen, once they've taken care of the boat and their oars, will then grab the coxswain and swing him a couple times and then throw him way out in the water, because we had to carry him through the race. So that's a pretty good tradition.
So you always have to pick a coxswain who knows how to swim.
Yeah,
that's
I was
true.
going to say, note to self: do not be a coxswain. I cannot swim.
I didn't ever meet a coxswain who didn't know how to swim, because he was hoping, one, he would get thrown in, and two, if something happened when we were out on the water, like there's some bad things that can happen. Another, a sailboat could come right across the middle of your boat and tear it in half. So we all needed to know how to swim enough in an emergency. It never happened, but we needed to be prepared.
Yeah, seems like a good idea when you're going out.
Yeah.
with not much on you in a very small boat.
Yeah,
So
the coxswain was certainly not wearing a life preserver.
yeah.
That would be additional weight in the boat. So he had to be dressed as limited as possible because
Yeah.
every ounce mattered to us.
You said in 1970 or in the 70s, these are traditions. Do you know, is that still a thing today? Both those things, throwing the cocks in the water and getting the jerseys off the losing team's
I'm
backs.
reasonably certain that it is still a tradition that the winning crew gets the shirts from the losing crews. Yes, but I've not seen it happen. But I'm pretty sure it would be a tradition that would be hard to beat. What's really developed since the 1970s is women's crew has taken off. It literally, I think more universities have bigger women programs than men programs now, and I think it's partially because of Title IX, when it was developed, indicated that essentially universities and colleges had to spend as much money on women's sports as they do men's sports, and it also had some number issues in it where you had to accommodate as many women athletes as you did men. Well, at universities that had football programs, you had to find a sport that would keep a number of women involved. And crew, you start out with a boat of 9. And so the more boats you had with women, and you put money into that, but you were also able to fund more men's sports. So I think that's why women's crew is flourishing so well, is because Title IX had that secondary impact on them, on their funding. But they're if you see the West Coast sprints here, they're usually held up here in the Sacramento area on one of the lakes we have just off of Folsom Lake. There's the women's programs are just tremendous, and they are really good and successful crews internationally as well.
Well, yeah, I remember West Virginia. They had a women's varsity crew and not a men's, which I'm sure is Title IX related. I also remember, similar to you, I'm astounded to hear that you'd never had rowed before college, but
Yeah.
there I remember seeing like flyers on billboards in different buildings at West Virginia that said like, "Hey, want to play varsity sport? Come row crew."
Yeah.
And that's definitely the only varsity sport I saw signs like that for. I thought, man, if I
That's
were
changed. That's
I
changed
consider that.
significantly since the 70s. You now have some high school crews rowing as part of the club programs around the state. But back in the 70s and 80s, the only place you saw that in America was on the East Coast. And I remember when I was one of my first assignments flying C-5 cargo jets for the Air Force, we went up to Philadelphia and just happened to run across some high school crews competing on one of the rivers in Philadelphia. And we found out that high school crew was actually a big program on the East Coast. And I think that's probably why back in the 70s and 80s, the Ivy League schools, Penn, Cornell, and all those like schools had such great programs and were so competitive nationally, is that they had these pre-trained oarsmen coming up into their programs. We didn't have that on the West Coast, but schools like Washington, UCLA, Cal had a big program back in the 70s. They developed a training program that was so intense and had that bigger student body where they could draw the best athletes into their crew programs, and they were really competitive with the East Coast and Ivy League programs in the 1970s, and they've even gotten better since then. So,
Cool. You mentioned these Ivy League in the book he talks about that too, kind of this East Coast bias, and traditionally at the time in the 30s most championships prior had been won by East Coast schools. Talks about the
If
Pittsburgh
you,
Regatta. However,
I was
he
gonna say, if
says
you would
that
ask me what I think of when I think of crew, it would be that, and like um, specifically the Charles River in Boston,
Yep.
like right near where Harvard is.
Harvard,
Um,
yeah, Harvard and
yeah,
Yale. You
exactly.
think of them when you
That's
think
like that's what pops into my head. Sorry to jump
yeah,
in
when you
there,
think
just
of
to
crew,
like,
you think of Harvard and Yale. Yeah,
yeah,
their programs are traditionally not as strong as the bigger schools, better funded schools, more athletic schools, I guess is the way to put it. Harvard and Yale, you tend to associate more with higher studies, the athletic programs would be probably Penn, University of Pennsylvania, um, and the bigger athletic schools on the Navy has a great program. I've lost track of who's really competitive in crew on the East Coast nowadays,
yeah.
but I'm sure it's
Anyway,
back
just to
when
say
when
like,
we rode in the national championships at the IRA. Cornell was the biggest crew, and they were the best crew at that year.
I'm glad you bring that up there, John, because that was kind of the question I was trying to say is like, I think to me, and he mentions this in the book too, the author, James Brown, is that the stereotype, at least then, in my mind, maybe also now, is kind of that Ivy League stereotype or that like kind of wealthy, upper class, white,
prep
primarily
school.
people who that's the population who rose crew. So I'm just curious, was that your perception of crew in the 70s? And do you think that has changed at all? Is it still mostly like a white sport, or has it become more diverse in terms of maybe some different metrics?
That wasn't my perception at all in the 70s because we all came from different backgrounds. Race didn't have any part of it. We had men of color who rode on road crew. Um, I think what the perception is, or what comes to my mind in the 70s, is that crew developed over, oh, it was probably 50 years before the 1970s. And in the early 1900s, it was a um, Yale, Harvard type of sport. Uh, I don't know when Cal's program actually started on the West Coast, but it was an aristocratic type of sport where the higher echelons would row crew and their children would row crew. And it wasn't necessarily for being hulking, strong oarsmen athletics. It was more for row in a congenial way and win the race against the other Ivy League school. At least that's my feeling about it. Um, it the sport changed when the real athletic schools decided to make it an athletic competition more than a get together and a gentleman sport. And it actually became a true athletic competition. I think
Hmm.
Europe's been a little longer than the United States in being athletic in that sport, but I may be totally all wet about that perception of the initial crew in America being aristocratic, but uh, that was my perception back then. By the 70s, that had gone away because if you wanted to compete for Harvard and Yale, you were trying to build up a strong crew. Um, uh, but back years, 10, 20 years before that, they were rowing Harvard and Yale on that river that you mentioned. Yeah, the Boston,
Yeah.
the Boston River or whatever.
Yeah, the mouth of the Charles, I think. I
Mouth of
think
the
that's
Charles.
the name of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's some big thing there they do annually.
yeah.
It's a crew event. But anyway. Um, yeah. Cool. Um, so I think we have kind of one final topic before we wrap things up here. But to first lead into that, So talking about Loyola Marymount, growing up near there in Southern California, I understand you grew up as a Los Angeles Dodgers fan.
Yeah.
However,
Vin Scully and Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax and all the old guys. Yeah.
yeah, um,
But then I
however,
married.
yeah, at a certain point you changed allegiances.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit of that story?
Oh, I married 40 years ago. So 42 years ago. And her father, my wife's father, is a Giants and 49er fan, having lived in Northern California all his life. So I either had to change my allegiance or figure out some way to avoid having some really touchy Thanksgiving dinners. So I decided to become a Giants fan.
It's true love.
Yeah, it was true love, and it turns out it was a good decision to make because the Giants have won more World Series than the Dodgers have, and especially in the last 10 years. So
I was gonna say early 2010 is a good time to be a Giants fan.
that's right.
That's for sure.
2010, 2012, and 2014. Yep.
Well, just from that little bit, sounds like you might be good at this little trivia game I thought I'd develop for some fun here. So we have, I thought both Johns would play here, John Haluck, John Rossi. I got some trivia questions in a game we will call Dodgers or Giants. All right, so the answer to each of these questions will be either the Dodgers or the Giants. So how well do you know West
And I
Coast
trust you
baseball
haven't
here?
shared the answers with John. Is that
I
right?
have not.
No,
He
I haven't seen any of this.
All right, so yeah, let's get started here. Some fun trivia. I enjoyed looking these up. Some which I knew, a lot of which I did not know. Great. So
Boy, if you didn't know some of these, I don't know if I have much of a shot here, but we'll see.
Find out. All right. So this team convinced the other team to move to the West Coast.
Well, I believe that's the Dodgers convinced the Giants to move because the Dodgers moved first, I believe, and therefore I think that they convinced the Giants.
John Rossi, you agree? See,
Yeah, I would have said the Dodgers moved first, so then that would be my thought.
Boom. You guys got it. 1-for-1. Yep. Dodgers are the first one. Walter O'Malley, who was their owner, who was the owner when they signed Jackie Robinson, also had this idea that, hey, we're going to move to the West Coast. And the Giants, he talked to the Giants owner and said, hey, we need another team to compete with because at that time, if the Dodgers would move by themselves, the closest team to them would have been the St. Louis Cardinals. So he convinced his crosstown rival to move to California.
You may not know this, but the Los Angeles Dodgers played their home games in the Coliseum in Los Angeles for the first year or two. The Coliseum is where UCLA or USC plays their football games.
Mm-hmm.
UCLA used to play their football games there. They've now moved to the Rose Bowl, but there's not room enough for a Major League Baseball field in the Coliseum. So what they did was they put a fence in left field that was more than 100 feet high. Wow. So the only way that the batters could hit a home run in left field was to hit a really high fly ball. A little bit of trivia you may not have known.
I did not know that.
Yeah, no.
That's great.
Wow.
All right, super cool. Okay, how about this one? This team originally was considering moving to Minnesota.
I would say that's the Dodgers.
I would have guessed Giants actually. That I was thinking Giants before you said that. But I'll be contrarian. I'll say Giants.
All right.
It is the Giants.
Oh.
So the Walter O'Malley thinks let's move to California. Horace Stoneham is actually thinking we're going to move to Minnesota, the Twin Cities, and Walter O'Malley convinces him, no, come to the West Coast instead, and we'll continue this rivalry over in California.
Okay.
All right, next one. This team has the most National League pennants.
Ooh,
I think
That's
that's
actually-
I think that's the Dodgers. The World Series is the Giants. So I'm going to say Dodgers.
Okay, got Dodgers.
I'm going Giants again.
It is very close, but the answer is the Dodgers. The Dodgers have 24 pennants. The Giants have 23 pennants. One apart. All right, how about this one? Which team has more National League West Division titles?
Yeah,
I would say Dodgers.
I'd say Dodgers
I'm
too.
going.
Yeah, that one isn't close. So 1969, first year we have divisions. Since then, the Dodgers have won 19 division titles. Giants have only won 9.
Yeah,
There's a
they
little
just can't win.
separation
They can't win the big one. They
Yeah.
can't win the big one. They can win the smaller one.
But the one more World Series, like you mentioned, which is one of my questions. You already answered it. San Francisco has 8 World Series titles. Dodgers have 7.
Yeah.
So
Well,
also
if
pretty
you
close.
include the time they were in New York, though, it's a little. The Giants have even more. I'm pretty sure. I think that's
Really?
only since they moved to the West Coast.
That could be true.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? Which team has more all-time wins?
Against each other or total wins?
Total.
Little wins.
Okay.
Actually, we'll do both. We'll do both. I
Alright.
have both answers. Which has more all-time wins and more head-to-head wins?
You have the answers to both those questions?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Man, my
ahead.
personal money is on. I'm not actually putting money on this, but my guess is the Dodgers have more all-time wins, and the Giants have won more head-to-head.
I'll do
Okay,
the
one
opposite.
answer.
I'll do the opposite. I think it's Giants have more all-time wins, but the Dodgers have more head-to-head wins.
Okay. If you combine your answers in a certain way, we have the right answer. San Francisco, the Giants are the answer for both of these, actually.
Really?
Yeah. So the
Wow.
Giants have 11,367 wins as of this afternoon. I don't know what this is. Los Angeles Dodgers, so that's 11,367. The Dodgers have 11,219.
Wow.
It's kind of incredible it's that close
Yeah.
for teams that have been around for
Yeah.
before 1900.
Yeah.
And then in head-to-head, this is also crazy. The head-to-head record is the Giants lead 1,269 to 1,247
Wow.
with
That is
17
amazing.
ties.
Man,
Where did you get these answers? Where'd you get this data? This
Online, all these baseball
Yeah.
encyclopedia things you could
Dr. Google?
look at. But yeah, Google search.
Wow.
But they led to me to these. Yeah.
that's awesome.
But yeah, kind of crazy. It's been that close.
I wonder
in fact,
if there's like a stretch of only like a few years where a lot of that difference was made. If like, were the Dodgers, they were like bad for a few years. Well, I don't know too much. I don't know enough baseball history to know
No.
anyway. But I'm just curious if they were like, a couple bad seasons because of how close it is.
Yeah,
And, like,
I
it's-
grew up with them, and I can't recall a single really bad season the Dodgers ever had. So that's why I'm shocked at those
Yeah.
statistics.
the Giants actually became, another fast fact, the first professional team. It just said, I don't know if it's in the country or in the world, but first professional sports team to win 10,000 games. They beat the Dodgers 4-3 in 2005 for their
Wow.
10,000th win as a franchise.
Wow.
All right, how about this one? So you correctly said that the Giants have more World Series titles. Which team has won back-to-back World Series titles?
Oh, that's got to be the Dodgers. Back when they were playing the Yankees, I think.
John Ransom?
I'm not going to put forward a guess.
I think that was the Dodgers. May have been in the '60s, actually.
I believe you got that, and I definitely would not have known that. So
Yeah,
I can't
I
claim
was
any
you weren't
credit.
alive then.
I was surprised to read this. I was also surprised how few times this has been done. I would think it had been done more times than this, but there aren't that many teams that have won back-to-back World Series. But it's actually the Giants.
Really?
So the Dodgers have appeared in several back-to-back World Series,
Yeah.
but the Giants actually way back in 1921 and 1922
Okay.
won back-to-back World Series. They defeated the Yankees in both those World Series. In 1921, it was 5-3. They beat the Yankees. It was the last year of this experimental best-of-9 format. And then the next year, in 1922, they faced the Yankees again. These are the first two teams we had an all New York World Series. They beat the Yankees 4-0 to 1 tie. In game 2, they called the game because it was dark and called it a tie. So we have a 4-0 to 1 World Series.
World Series. Wow.
Yeah. In both those World Series, every game was played at the Polo Grounds. The Yankees played their home games at the Polo Grounds, as well as the Giants. It wasn't until 1923 the Yankees completed building Yankee Stadium, moved in there. In 1923, the World Series also featured the Giants and the Yankees. However, that was Babe Ruth and the Bronx Bombers' first of their 27 World Series titles. So, little history there.
Yankees, of course, are great statistics, great trivia.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to look at.
Fun baseball
Yankees
history.
are also
fun New York history.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all good. So the Yankees are the last team to win back-to-back World Series titles. That was 1998, 1999, 2000. They won all 4 or 3 in a row. Okay, which team has back to Dodgers Giants? Which team has more Cy Young Award winners?
Oh, that's got to be the Dodgers.
Yeah, I would guess Dodgers also.
Yeah, the Dodgers have the most all-time. They have 12 Cy Young Award winners. San Francisco only has 3.
As in 12 different pitchers who have won it, or
no, it was in
pitchers
12
on
individual
the
Cy Young
Dodgers have
Awards.
won it 12 years.
Oh,
yeah,
12
different
awards.
times.
Gotcha.
Sandy Koufax won it 3 times, and Clayton Kershaw won it 3 times.
Yeah.
Everyone else has won it once for them. When Tim Lincecum won back-to-back Cy Youngs in 2008, 2009. He was the first Giants pitcher to win the Cy Young since Mike McCormick in 1967, and he's only the second Giants pitcher ever to win a Cy Young award.
Wow.
Which is kind of incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, which stadium holds more people?
Dodger Stadium.
I will say the opposite. Well, because I don't know. My thought is that yes, Dodger Stadium, but it's like it was built a while ago at this point, whereas San Francisco Stadium is
San Francisco Stadium is newer, but it was specifically built to limit the attendance to 42,000.
Okay,
and I'm pretty sure
you got it.
Perez Ravine is more than 42.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
You got it. San Francisco,
cool.
Yeah, Oracle Park. You're right in the dot. 41,915 is the official attendance or capacity of Oracle Park, which of course was AT&T Park. Dodger Stadium, 56,000.
Yeah,
one of the larger stadiums in the major leagues.
Yep.
All right, last question.
There we go.
And this is the only one that the answer is not Dodger Giants. Which city has won more total professional championships? And I only considered NBA, NFL, NHL, NFL. So those 4 major sports leagues. Which city, San Francisco or Los Angeles, has won more titles?
I have my guess.
I'm going to have to say San Francisco.
Yeah, I would also guess San Francisco.
Although you had the Lakers that won quite a few.
It's true.
Dodgers have won quite a few. I'm not sure the football. I think it's San Francisco. I'm pretty sure the 49ers carried the day.
Yes, the 49ers have won 5 NFL championships, Super Bowl titles. Then you have the Giants adding 3 World Series in San Francisco, plus the Warriors won.
Yeah.
Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 NBA titles, which brings you to 13 championships. I would guess that most people would not add Oakland to that because it's a separate city. If you wanted to, you could add 6 Oakland, would bring a total to 19. Whether or not you include Oakland, That's less than Los Angeles. Los Angeles won more championships.
Oh, man.
So you have the Rams won it in 51, and then this last year in 2021. The Raiders won it while in LA in 83. The Dodgers have won it 6 times. The Lakers have won it 12 times while in LA. The Kings in the NHL have won it twice. So that's 23. And then if you wanted to include Anaheim, the Angels won it and the Ducks won it once. So you'll have 25 championships for the Los Angeles area.
So it was Los Angeles then?
Okay.
So it's Los Angeles. Yeah.
The Sharks, the San Jose Sharks, did you include the San Jose Sharks for the San Francisco area or not?
They have never won the
They've never won. Okay.
Never won. Yeah.
Okay. So it was
So-
LA then. All right.
It was LA. It was LA.
Okay.
And the city
All right.
champion.
Good.
Well, from the city champions. So.
All right.
Okay.
Well, there you
Can we
have
go
it.
on- Can we go on?
Dodgers,
Are we done?
Giants.
Are we done with the podcast?
That's all. Well, that's all the trivia questions I had. Did
Okay.
you have any you want to ask us?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I do want to talk with you off
For
camera.
sure.
or off-
For sure. Yeah, I can't wait. Before we do that, we usually end with one question for all our guests. So we'll end with this one. And you've touched on this already, but just give you one final chance to make a statement here. Why is sports important?
I think it teaches people to play by rules, and there are some absolutes, right and wrong. And if you play by the rules and live by the absolutes, that eventually you will learn that just about anything can be handled appropriately. I don't know if that makes much sense, but that's the way I feel. It's I've tried to instill that in my children, as you play by the rules and you work hard.
There it is.
You work hard and try to do it the right way the first time.
Absolutely. Sorry.
And if you do that, you might beat leukemia. That's incredible.
No, my leukemia is incurable, but I've lived with it for 21 years, and
It's amazing.
crew helped me get through the toughest times.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, fantastic.
yeah.
Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing with us so much about about all the lessons you've learned through crew and giving us kind of the 101 of crew. I'm sure you'd be a great coach. And yeah, just appreciate your time and all the stories and wisdom you shared with us. It's
Well,
been fun.
thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Super cool. Well, until next time, to all listeners from Points in Between and Not in Between. Wait, that's not how it starts. Sorry. Let's try that
Between
again.
where? Yeah.
Yeah. From the Rockies of Colorado to the Banks of Missouri. Thanks to all our listeners from Points in Between and Not in Between. Until next time, he's John and I'm Adam. Stay classy, Frostburg.